Hi everybody, I'm Penina Taylor, and I'm going to talk to you for just a few minutes about the idea of taking fear out of our decision-making process, especially when it concerns our businesses. Let's say you've come to a crossroads in your life. Do you continue working this job that you hate but doesn't bring you satisfaction, but at least provides a steady income? Or do you take a leap of faith and launch that business you've been dreaming of for years? Maybe you've already got your own company and you're considering making a huge investment that could have incredible quantum level results, or could crash and burn and leave you with nothing but debt to show for it. Maybe you've met someone who could be the perfect partner to help you grow your venture. Or maybe she might steal your ideas and launch her own competitive business. How do you know what to do? How do you decide? Every time we have a decision to make, we engage our brains, right? Which part of our brains we engage depends on how we see the choice and what emotions it evokes in us. The two parts of our brains that are involved in the decision-making process are the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that's not only in charge of abstract thinking and thought analysis, but it's also responsible for regulating behavior. This is the part of your brain that helps you choose between right and wrong. A properly functioning prefrontal cortex inhibits inappropriate behaviors. It allows us to plan ahead and create strategies, and it helps focus thoughts, enabling us to pay attention, to learn, to concentrate on goals. This is the part of the brain associated with higher thinking. It's the logical part of the brain. The other part of your brain that's involved in decision making is the limbic system. That's kind of the animal part of your brain. This is a more primitive part of our brain, and it regulates motivation, emotion, learning, and memory. Included in the limbic system is something called the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is responsible for fear conditioning, or the associative learning process by which we learn to fear something. This is the part of the brain that controls the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. It's the part of the brain that takes over when we're confronted with a threatening stimulus. So, for example, if you're out camping in the forest and a big bear starts coming towards you, what do you do? Now, I actually have no idea since I've never seen a bear in person, but I've encountered, for example, a young child with chocolate spread all over his hands and face approaching me when I was wearing a dry clean only outfit. And I think that the response in the amygdala might be similar. Of course, the first thing you do is you freeze. Your heart starts beating really fast. Maybe you break out in a cold sweat, and your prefrontal cortex, your decision maker, shuts down. Because if you're out in the wild and you're approached by a very large, dangerous wild animal, the last thing you need is a voice in your head reminding you that you have a project due, or some other logic-oriented voice. At that moment, what you don't need is higher level thinking. What you need is to focus on the immediate situation, what's going on around you. There's a big bear headed towards you. You aren't going to reason with it. You need to save your life. You need to switch into survival mode. Survival mode is controlled by the amygdala, and in order for it to work, the prefrontal cortex has to shut down. Same thing happens when we're confronted by a decision that has within it the risk of failure. We have a situation, a deadline, or a choice to make, or even a personal goal that we voluntarily set for ourselves. But as soon as the prefrontal cortex begins to evaluate the situation, and even the remotest possibility of what we would deem failure arises, we experience an anxiety response to this threatening stimulus, which is the threat of failure and all of whatever that means to us. And just like that big, scary bear, we're forced into survival mode. The prefrontal cortex shuts down and the amygdala takes over, and we freeze or we run the other way. The clear motivation in this situation is fear. The problem is that when we allow fear, that primal part of our brain, to make our decisions for us, the only thing we can do is survive. That's the only outcome that comes from fear-based decisions. If you want to do more than just survive, if you want to grow both personally and in your business, if you want to spend your life working at something you love to do, if you want to be able to own your own home, send your children to college, retire on more than just Social Security, you cannot allow your amygdala to make your decisions. But how do you do that? How do you make choices that aren't ruled by fear? Well, number one is be open to the fact that even failure is part of the process of success. This is part of taking fear out of the decision-making process altogether. If there's nothing to fear, then the amygdala has nothing to protect you from, and the prefrontal cortex can take over. It can do its job. Number two is get rid of expectations. Now, that doesn't mean don't dream. It doesn't mean don't visualize what success looks like to you, because obviously you have to have a vision for what it looks like or you'll never get there. But don't rely on past experience to tell you how things are going to turn out. Sometimes life has a way of surprising you. People who were told that they couldn't do what they wanted to do because of a physical or mental limitation have managed not only to do those things, but to become wildly successful at them. Think about some very popular singers of the past who actually couldn't sing, for example. People who had an idea and were told it wouldn't sell. Nobody will want it. But they had the determination and they turned their ideas into multi-million-dollar enterprises. The biggest factor in these successes is determination, not logic. So understand that even though there may be a risk factor in your decision, you could be wildly successful. And the third thing is you have to plan. You have to have a plan. And I use this acronym of the word plan, P-L-A-N, to help us with the steps. The first one, P, is purpose. The first step is to write what your choices are and why you want to make this change. This becomes a type of rough mission statement and serves to help recenter you when you're going through a hard time. Basically asking yourself why you want to do this. Viktor Frankl, quoting Nietzsche, said a person can bear with almost any how if he has a why. So what's your why? The L in the word plan stands for look. Write out not only what successes would look like, but what the possible negative outcomes might be. Writing out your worst case scenario and facing it head on starts you on the path of being able to conquer it. If you're prepared for the bear, and you know what to do when the bear approaches, you find that you don't necessarily need to run. Look, when I first considered making this video, I became scared. Why? Maybe I shouldn't do it. So I sat down and I asked myself, well, why not? Well, maybe they won't like what I have to say. Maybe they won't agree with me. Maybe they won't like me. Maybe they won't like the way I look. So I stopped and I said, okay, and what if they don't? What's the worst that can happen? All of a sudden, those things, while still possibilities, stop becoming a threat stimulus and start becoming part of the scenery. The A in the word plan is assess. Not only do you need to write out a business plan and how to get from here to there, but you need to sit down and say, okay, and if this doesn't work, what do I do? And if your answer is, I don't know, then you're not there yet. What if today you lost everything you had? What would you do? Would you borrow money from your parents? Would you go out and get a temporary job that pays anything? You could freak out, but there are usually other options. If you start thinking in terms of what you could do, if the worst imaginable thing happens, it becomes less scary. The less of a threat a situation becomes, the more likely you are to be able to use your prefrontal cortex to make your decision. N stands for next. Decide what the very next action is that you need to take to do to make forward progress towards this purpose. Remember that fear only allows you to survive and nothing more. Is that what you really want? What are you afraid of?